The Witch's Castle. Moonlit Tales of the Macabre, Small Bites, Book 11. Written by Alexander Belyaev. Narrated by Fred Wolinsky. 1. The Fugitive. Crystalline Leghorn Mountains, with wide rounded tops covered with pine forests, stretched across Sudetenland from south to north. Among these mountains, located almost in the centre of Europe, there were many secluded corners where the thunderclaps of world's events never reached. The pines rose toward the dark green canopy like majestic columns of a Gothic cathedral. Their crowns were so thick, even on a bright summer day, these mountain forests were filled with green twilight, punctured here and there by a narrow golden sunbeam. The ground was covered with such a thick carpet of pine needles, one could walk on it without making any sound at all. Not a single blade of grass, not a single flower could make it through this thick layer. Mushrooms and berries didn't grow here. There was very little wild life. A quiet raven sometimes settled on a branch for a moment's rest in mid-flight. With no mushrooms, berries, or animals, people had no reason to come here either. Only the clearings and swamps livened up the darkly imperious monotony of the woods, like oases. The mountain wind rustled the needles, filling the woods with mournful music. Lower in the foothills there were a few villages, whose dwellers worked at sawmills, in mines, and engaged in minor farming. But not even the poorest of them made it to this altitude to get firewood. It was too far away, and the path was much too perilous. The old ranger Moritz Feldman didn't really know what he was protecting, and from whom. "I am guarding the witches at the old castle," he sometimes said with a chuckle to his old lady Bertha, "and that is all there is to my work." The local population avoided visiting the wooded area near the top of the mountain, with its ruins of an old castle. One of the towers was still fairly well preserved, but it too had long since stood uninhabited. As usual, there were legends surrounding this castle, and passed from one generation to the next. The local villagers of this forsaken region were convinced the ruins housed witches, ghosts, vampires, werewolves, and other evil scum. A handful of brave men who dared come close to the castle, or travellers who had lost their way and accidentally came to it, assured they saw shadows fleeting across the windows, and heard soul-rending screams of innocent babies kidnapped and killed by the witches for their sorcery. Some even went so far as to insist they saw these witches, as the latter ran across the woods toward the castle in the guise of white she-wolves with bloodied fangs. People believed all these stories without questioning them. The villagers tried to keep as far as possible from this terrible, foul place. But the old Moritz, who had seen much of the world before fates landed him in this wild country, did not believe the tales, was not afraid of the witches, and passed by the castle calmly when making his rounds. Moritz knew very well it wasn't children crying under the knives of the terrible witches, but owls, and the ghosts were created out of moonlight and shadows by someone's persistently frightened imagination. Bertha didn't entirely trust Moritz's explanation, and was a little concerned for him, but he merely laughed at her fears. There was one other man who held no regard for the witches in the old castle, a Czech youth by the name of Joseph Ganka. When Germans invaded Sudetenland, he was sent to a labour camp. Ganka escaped from the camp, wandered through the mountains for several days, and found temporary shelter in the remaining tower of the witch's castle. Knowing the local villagers' superstitious fear of the place, he felt relatively safe. Hunger forced him to venture into the woods in search of food, but there wasn't enough to live on, and the young man's strength was waning. Once, when he was resting by a swamp, already completely emaciated, he was found by Moritz Feldman. The old ranger asked the youth sternly who he was, and what he was doing there. Joseph looked at the ranger, and decided the old man wasn't a bad fellow, even though he addressed him so sternly. Ganka hesitated
Sample complete. Ready to continue?